What if a powerful CEO walked into her company lobby, expecting silence, but instead found her twin boys laughing beside a janitor who had turned buckets into drums? In that moment, she froze, realizing her children, born deaf, were connecting with the world in a way she had never seen before. What followed in the kitchen would change everything she thought she knew about life, leadership, and love. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Now, let's jump into the story. Have you ever witnessed a moment so surprising, so unexpected, that it made you pause and rethink everything you believed about people? This is exactly what happened to Margaret Ellis, a CEO who had spent her entire life building an empire with discipline, sharp focus, and countless sleepless nights. She was known as a woman of power, a leader who never let her guard down, and a professional who demanded perfection from everyone around her. But beneath the tailored suits and her firm reputation, Margaret carried a struggle that few people knew about. Margaret was the single mother of two young boys, Daniel and Noah. They were twins, both born deaf. From the moment she held them in her arms, she promised herself she would give them the best that life could offer. She had spent money on tutors, on speech therapists, on the most advanced programs available. But no matter how much effort she put in, she could not escape one painful truth. Her sons rarely smiled. They lived in a world that felt closed off, a world where joy seemed unreachable. She loved them deeply, but love alone did not bridge the silence that separated them from the rest of the world. On a quiet late afternoon, Margaret left her office earlier than usual. She wanted to surprise Daniel and Noah, who often waited in the lobby with their nanny. As she stepped off the elevator, adjusting her jacket and preparing to greet them, her eyes fell on something she never expected to see. Right there, in the center of the polished marble floor, sat Leonard, the company's quiet maintenance worker. Everyone in the building knew him, but few ever noticed him. He was the man who fixed light bulbs, carried tools, and moved silently through the hallways. Today, however, he was not holding a mop or toolbox. Instead, he had turned several empty cleaning buckets upside down and arranged them in a circle. With two old wooden sticks in his hands, he tapped out a steady rhythm. The sound echoed softly through the lobby, bouncing off the walls like a heartbeat. What truly stopped Margaret cold were her sons. Daniel and Noah were sitting cross-legged beside Leonard, their small palms pressed flat against the buckets. Their eyes sparkled with energy, and their faces shone with wide smiles she had not seen in so long. They were not simply watching. They were feeling the rhythm through vibrations that traveled from the buckets into their hands, their arms, and into their hearts. Margaret froze at the sight, her breath caught in her throat. This was not just play. This was something more. Her boys were alive in a way she had only dreamed of seeing. She could feel her chest tighten with emotion. For a moment, she wanted to rush forward, to demand an explanation. Why was the maintenance worker sitting with her children? Where was the nanny who was supposed to be watching them? Yet before those questions could form fully in her mind, her heart whispered louder than her doubts. Look at them. Just look at them. The twins began laughing, clapping their hands in rhythm with Leonard's beats. Noah leaned forward, mimicking the drumming with his little fists, while Daniel's head moved slightly as if he could feel the music deep inside him. Margaret could not remember the last time she had seen such joy on their faces. For a long moment, she stood hidden by the shadow of the elevator wall, unsure if she should interrupt. She watched as Leonard smiled gently at the boys, guiding them with patient taps and nods. There was no judgment in his eyes, no hesitation, only kindness. Suspense hung heavy in the air. Margaret's mind battled with conflicting emotions. Part of her was furious that boundaries had been crossed. Another part of her, the mother buried beneath her corporate armor, felt tears threaten to fall. This simple act, done by a man most people ignored, had reached her sons in ways that years of therapy and money had not. Finally, Leonard noticed her. His drumming slowed. Embarrassment crossed his face as he lowered the sticks. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said quickly. They looked restless waiting, and I thought maybe this would keep them busy. Margaret did not answer immediately. Her throat felt tight, and her heart was still pounding. Then, with a trembling voice, she whispered, "Don't stop." In that moment, everything changed. The powerful CEO, who had conquered boardrooms and markets, now stood powerless in front of two smiling children and a janitor with a pair of wooden sticks. She watched, motionless, as the rhythm filled the air again and her sons lit up with happiness. Margaret did not yet know it, but this unexpected discovery was the beginning of a story that would transform her family, her leadership, and her very definition of strength. And though she could not predict what would happen next, she knew one thing for certain. The man with the buckets and the steady rhythm had just opened a door to a world she had long thought was closed. The night after Margaret Ellis saw her sons smiling with Leonard, she could not sleep. She replayed the moment again and again in her mind. Daniel and Noah had never responded that way to any therapist or teacher. They had never glowed with such energy, not even in the most carefully designed programs she had paid for. It was a simple scene, a few buckets, and a man most of the office barely noticed, but the effect was powerful. Margaret's thoughts shifted between disbelief and hope. How could it be that a janitor had reached her children in a way no expert could? What did he know that the specialists missed? The next morning, she sat in her office, staring at her calendar filled with meetings, but her mind was elsewhere. She needed answers. She needed to understand who this man really was. That afternoon, she asked Leonard to meet her in the staff kitchen. The room was quiet, the smell of coffee faint in the air, and the hum of the vending machine filled the silence between them. Leonard looked uneasy, as though unsure if he was in trouble. He rubbed his hands together, waiting for her to speak. "Yesterday," Margaret began slowly, "I saw what you did with my boys. They were alive in a way I haven't seen before. Tell me, how did you know to do that?" Leonard shifted, his voice soft but steady. "I noticed them waiting in the lobby most days. They seemed lonely. I thought maybe rhythm could help. I've seen how people respond to vibration, even if they can't hear the sound." Margaret tilted her head. Why rhythm? Why music? For the first time, Leonard lifted his eyes to hers. There was weight in his expression, a quiet history in the way he spoke. "Because it's who I used to be. I was a drummer once. I played with a small band. Nothing famous, but music was everything to me. It was how I breathed, how I understood the world." Margaret leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. "What happened?" He paused, his voice carrying both pride and sorrow. "My mother became sick. The tours, the late nights, they didn't fit with caring for her. I put the drums away and found steady work. It paid the bills and kept her comfortable until the end. After she passed, I never really picked up the sticks again. Life moved on. I needed something simple, something quiet." The words hung in the air, heavy with sacrifice. Margaret studied him, realizing that behind the uniform and quiet presence stood a man with untapped depths. He was not just a janitor. He was someone who had lived for rhythm, who had carried it in his veins. "And my sons?" she asked gently. Leonard's eyes softened. "I recognized something in them. The silence in their faces reminded me of my own after she was gone. Music is more than sound. It's feeling, vibration, connection. I thought maybe if they could feel it through the buckets, they might find something that therapy alone couldn't give." Margaret felt tears rise. Her sons had never lit up like that, not in years. This man, overlooked by most of her executives, had understood them better than any professional she had hired. "Do you realize what you've done?" she whispered. Leonard shook his head. "I only wanted to give them a moment of joy." Margaret sat back, stunned by his humility. The CEO, who prided herself on hiring the best, on building a company with sharp precision, had been shown something life-changing by the least visible person in the building. For several moments, silence filled the kitchen. Then, with a steady breath, Margaret said, "I want you to spend more time with them. Teach them, guide them. Whatever you did yesterday, it meant more than you know." Leonard's eyes widened. "Are you sure? I'm just... ... She cut him off, her voice firm. "You are not just anything. You gave my boys a gift I couldn't buy. That matters." A quiet nod from Leonard sealed the moment. For the first time in years, Margaret felt hope rising. Perhaps her sons were not locked in silence forever. Perhaps there was another way to reach them, a way no expert could have predicted. As Leonard left the kitchen, Margaret remained seated, her thoughts racing. She understood that what had started in the lobby was no accident. It was the beginning of something far greater, a connection that could change everything. What she did not yet know was how deep that change would go, or how far it would test her choices as a leader and as a mother. Over the next few weeks, the lobby of Ellis Industries became a different kind of classroom. Every afternoon, when Daniel and Noah finished their schoolwork, Leonard waited with his buckets, sticks, and gentle smile. The twins would rush to him, their eyes lighting up as they tapped rhythms on the plastic surfaces. What began as simple beats grew into more complex patterns. Leonard showed them how to clap in sequence, how to take turns leading, and how to express feelings through rhythm. For Margaret, watching from the sidelines was like witnessing a miracle unfold. Her sons, once withdrawn and quiet, began to interact in ways she had only dreamed of. Daniel would tap a short pattern when he wanted attention. Noah created his own beat to show when he was happy. Slowly, the silence that had seemed so heavy began to crack open. Music had become their language, even if no sound filled the air. Margaret's heart swelled with pride, but also with humility. She realized that what years of therapy and expensive programs had failed to unlock, Leonard's patient drumming had achieved in a matter of days. Her sons were smiling, laughing, and for the first time, connecting to the world outside their small circle. Yet, as the twins transformed, challenges began to surface. Whispers started in the upper floors of the building. Several board members noticed that the CEO was spending more time in the lobby with her children and a maintenance worker than in the executive meetings. One director confronted her directly during a board session. "Margaret," he said carefully, "you are the head of a major company. Your reputation is everything. Is it wise to let a janitor take such an important role with your children? What message does that send to your employees, your investors?" Margaret's jaw tightened. She wanted to fire back immediately, but she kept her composure. "What message does it send?" she asked calmly, "if I ignore the very person who gave my sons joy for the first time in years?" Leadership is not just about profit. It is about recognizing value where others do not. The room fell quiet, but the tension lingered. Not everyone agreed with her perspective. Some members feared the optics. Others thought it beneath her position to rely on someone from the maintenance staff. Outside the boardroom, Margaret also struggled with her own doubts. She wondered if she was risking too much by letting Leonard into her children's lives. What if the board turned against her? What if her reputation as a strong CEO began to unravel? But then she would see Daniel and Noah tapping joyfully on the buckets, their smiles brighter than any quarterly report could ever be, and her doubts faded. Leonard, too, faced his own challenges. He had never intended to become a teacher. He was a man who preferred to stay in the background, unnoticed. Now, suddenly, The CEO herself was relying on him to guide her children. There were moments when he questioned whether he was worthy of that trust. Yet each time the twins laughed or copied one of his rhythms, he knew this was exactly where he was meant to be. The transformation continued. At home, Margaret noticed her sons using rhythm to communicate, even without Leonard. Daniel would drum his fingers on the table to signal when he wanted water. Noah clapped a pattern to show excitement. Slowly, their world of silence became filled with expression. Margaret felt less like a CEO juggling motherhood and more like the mother her children needed. But the challenges grew sharper. One evening, a senior board member called her privately. His voice was stern. "Your decisions have consequences, Margaret. This arrangement with Leonard, it makes people question your judgment. You've built this company on respect and authority. Do not risk it for sentiment." She listened quietly, but inside, her resolve hardened. Authority, she thought, meant nothing if it blinded her to what truly mattered. The tension between her professional image and her personal life reached its peak when an upcoming shareholders meeting threatened to expose her choice. Rumors had already begun to spread that the CEO was spending company time supporting a janitor's drumming sessions. Margaret knew the criticism would only grow louder. Still, she refused to let fear dictate her choices. In private, she told Leonard, "People may not understand what you've given us, but I do. My boys do. And that is enough." Leonard nodded quietly, his humility unshaken. Sometimes the world only sees the title, not the person. But children see the heart. Those words stayed with Margaret. They reminded her why she had to stand firm. The transformation of Daniel and Noah was undeniable. The challenges from the board were real and pressing. Margaret stood at a crossroads, knowing the path ahead would test her strength as both a leader and a mother. Yet deep inside, she also knew this was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning of something greater, something that would soon unfold in ways no one expected. The day of the company gathering arrived, and Margaret Ellis felt her nerves tighten as she walked into the cafeteria. It was not a boardroom, not a polished stage, but a simple space with rows of tables and the hum of employees settling in. The room buzzed with quiet curiosity. Everyone knew the CEO was about to speak, and rumors had already spread about her unusual connection with Leonard, the maintenance worker. Margaret stood at the front of the room, her twin boys by her side, and Leonard just a step behind them with his familiar buckets and drumsticks. She took a steady breath, her eyes scanning the faces of executives, assistants, engineers, and staff. Then, instead of giving a speech right away, she gestured to the boys. Daniel and Noah stepped forward. Their hands trembled with nervousness, but Leonard knelt beside them, tapping a slow rhythm on one of the buckets. The boys placed their palms on the surfaces and joined in. The cafeteria fell silent, every head turning toward the steady beat that filled the air. Though no sound came from the twins' voices, the rhythm spoke louder than words. The performance lasted only a few minutes, but it was enough. Daniel and Noah tapped out patterns they had learned from Leonard, then added their own creative beats. The pride on their faces was unmistakable. When they finished, the room erupted in applause. It was not polite clapping. It was real, heartfelt, and thunderous. The CEO's children had captured the hearts of every person in the room. Margaret stepped forward again, her voice calm but firm. Leadership is often measured by numbers, by profits, by titles. But today, I want you to see something else. Greatness can appear in places we least expect. It can come from a man holding a mop or a child tapping on a bucket. What matters is not the title we carry, but the heart we bring. Her words lingered in the air, and for the first time, the whispers of doubt seemed to fade. Board members who had once questioned her judgment now sat quietly, some even with tears in their eyes. The image of Daniel and Noah, alive with joy, was more powerful than any argument. After the gathering ended, employees approached Leonard to shake his hand. Many admitted they had walked past him daily without ever noticing him. Now they saw him differently. To Daniel and Noah, he was not a janitor. He was a teacher, a guide, and the bridge to a new world. In the weeks that followed, the impact of that day continued to grow. Margaret established a new program within the company, an initiative to support music and rhythm-based learning for children with hearing challenges. She named the program after Leonard's late mother, honoring the woman who had inspired his sacrifice and compassion. What began as a private moment in the lobby became a movement that touched families far beyond her own. For Margaret, the transformation was personal as well. She no longer felt divided between being a CEO and a mother. She realized the two roles could strengthen each other. Leading with compassion made her a better executive, and embracing humility made her a stronger parent. The walls she had built around herself began to fall, replaced with a sense of balance she had never known. As for Leonard, he continued his work at the company, but he was no longer invisible. Colleagues greeted him with respect, and the twins looked forward to every session with him. He carried himself with quiet dignity, never asking for recognition, always focusing on the joy in Daniel and Noah's eyes. The twins themselves blossomed. They began creating rhythms at home, drumming on tables, tapping on doors, and inventing new ways to communicate. What had once been a silent world was now filled with expression. For Margaret, every beat was a reminder that sometimes the answers we search for are found not in boardrooms or programs, but in the unexpected kindness of another human being. The story reached its lasting change one evening when Margaret walked home with her sons after work. The boys tapped rhythms on her arms as they walked, their laughter echoing in the night. Margaret tapped back, joining their game, her heart full. She looked at them and thought about how far they had come, and how one man with a pair of sticks had changed everything. The journey had been full of challenges, but the ending was clear. This was no longer just the story of a CEO or a janitor. It was the story of connection, of resilience, and of the power to see beyond titles. And as Margaret held her son's hands, she knew this was only the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter built not on silence, but on rhythm, love, and the courage to embrace the unexpected. And so, what began with a few buckets and a quiet janitor became the rhythm that gave two children their voice and a mother her hope. Remember, the smallest acts can create the greatest change. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.